Today, we're digging into a really powerful question based on the work of Janet Woititz and LifeCrafter's First52 parents. What actually happens to a child of an alcoholic? It's a journey that shapes pretty much everything, a lot of the time in ways that nobody else can see. So, let's get into it.
The whole thing kicks off with this really stark question: when is a child not a child? And the answer they give is just as stark: when that child lives with alcoholism. This one question, it gets right to the very heart of the entire experience.
And this gets to a really core contradiction, right? On the surface, you probably looked and acted like any other kid. But underneath, well, that's a whole different story. You weren't really frolicking or carefree. There was this edge of sadness, this weight that other kids just don't carry. You were playing the part of a child, but you didn't feel like one.
So, how do you survive in an environment that's so unpredictable? Well, to get by, children often take on these very specific roles. And these aren't conscious choices, not at all. They're survival mechanisms. Let's take a look at a few of the most common ones.
First up, you have the responsible child. This is the kid who basically becomes a little adult. They get all this praise for being so mature, so helpful, but the secret, the thing they're always thinking is, I wish I could be good enough. That praise, it never really lands. It never fills that hole.
And then you've got the total opposite, the scapegoat. This is the problem child, the one who's always messing up. But this role, it actually serves a huge purpose for the family. It's a massive distraction. See, if everyone's focused on what Tommy did wrong, nobody has to look at the real problem, the drinking.
Of course, there are other roles too. You've got the class clown, using humor as a shield, right? Making everyone laugh so they don't see the pain. And then there's the quiet one, the withdrawn child, the one who's just trying to become invisible. The hope is that if you don't make any waves, nothing bad will happen.
So, where do these roles even come from? Well, it all starts inside the home, a world that is defined by one thing: complete and total unpredictability.
I mean, imagine this. Every single day was a gamble. You'd walk through that door and you'd immediately have to scan the room, read the atmosphere. Is tonight going to be an okay night? According to Woititz, the only sure thing was that nothing was sure. And that creates this constant humming anxiety that just never really goes away.
And all of this leads to this really deep, profound feeling of being trapped, both physically in the house and emotionally. There's just no way out. This feeling is captured so perfectly in a dream that's shared by a woman named Gloria.
In her dream, she's trapped in a cage with her mother, and it's just suspended in this black, empty void. What a terrifyingly perfect metaphor for her reality, right? Trapped, isolated, and totally powerless. The dream ends with her trying to scream for help, but no sound comes out.
And to make things even worse, on top of this feeling of being trapped, you're dealing with these constant double messages. Your parent might say, I love you, but their actions, their tone, their impatience, it's all screaming, go away. You hear, I need you, but then you're told you can't do anything right. It is so confusing for a kid to process.
And then, the promises. The parent always meant it in the moment. This Saturday we'll go to the park. I'll be at your school play. I give you my word. But they almost never came true. And when promises are broken again and again and again, you learn a really hard lesson. Words don't mean much.
So you can see how this creates this deep internal conflict. Part of you fantasizes about just running away, but another part feels this huge responsibility to hold the family together. Leaving feels like you're abandoning a sinking ship, and the guilt is just crushing.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little. How did all this chaos at home spill out into the rest of the world? At school, with friends.
There's this great example in the source material about a 17-year-old kid named Don who's failing a class. His first reaction? Blame the teacher. That's a behavior he learned at home. Next, he tries to manipulate and con his way out of it. But here's the hopeful part, the final step. Don eventually learns how to take responsibility, which is a skill he was just never taught.
For so many kids in this situation, the biggest hurdle at school was just focusing. How are you supposed to focus on long division when you were up all night listening to your parents fight? How can you pay attention when you're just sick with worry about what you're going to find when you get home? Daydreaming wasn't laziness. It was an escape. It was survival.
And yeah, making friends, that was incredibly tough. There was always this feeling of being different, like you're an outsider looking in. I mean, how could you relate to other kids' problems when yours felt so huge and so secret? You just didn't feel like you were worthy of having friends because you'd been told in a million tiny ways that you weren't good enough.
And this all led to that one dreaded moment. You know the one. Your friend says, "Hey, let's play at your house this afternoon." It's such a simple, normal question, but for you, it caused instant panic. It meant you had to lie, you had to make up excuses, anything to stop someone from seeing what your home was really like. The risk of being found out was just too big. So when you put it all together, all these experiences, the roles, the unpredictability, the secrets, they all lead to one place, a really deep and lasting impact on how you see yourself.
So let's ask some really direct questions here. Did you have high self-esteem? Did you actually value yourself? Did you think you were worthy? I mean, a kid's sense of self is built on the messages they get from the world. So, what happens when those messages are just a chaotic mess of love and neglect, of praise and criticism? Well, what you end up with is what's called a distorted self-image. And it's important to note, it's not that it's a bad self-image necessarily, but it's a deeply confused one. When all the input you're getting is contradictory, your sense of who you are becomes, well, fragmented. You're never sure which message was the real one, so you're never really sure who you are.
And this brings us to what Janet Woititz calls the greatest paradox of all. You were told always tell the truth, but you learned very, very quickly that the hidden message was, but I don't want to know that. The one truth you could never, ever tell was the truth about what was happening at home. Honesty was demanded, but authenticity was punished.
So what's the big takeaway here? Why does all this matter? Because these feelings and experiences from childhood, they don't just magically disappear. They can follow you right into adulthood, leading to isolation, maybe even to marrying an alcoholic or becoming one yourself. The patterns we learn as kids, unless we understand them and deal with them, have a really powerful tendency to repeat.
And that brings us full circle, right back to a question for you. The authors leave us with this final thought. Where are you in the mix? It's a question meant to get you to reflect on how these dynamics might have played out in your own life. It's not about blame, it's about understanding. And that's where the healing starts.